What's up, Everyday Blades? Man, I have definitely found a new knife addiction. I have looked at Shirogorovs. I've seen them since I started collecting, and I've always meant to try one out, eventually get one. But I never did search one out. I never did try to go find one. And then one of our admins in the group, I kind of questioned him about it, and he's like, "That's my favorite brand." And I was like, "Well, okay." I value his opinion quite a bit. He goes, It's literally my favorite knife." I said, "Okay." I asked him what model to get, and he told me to get the F95, and holy cow. And I've already reviewed that knife and expressed how much I love it. So of course, once you get one great knife from a company, as a collector, you want another one. You want to try other ones. So it's hard to buy new Shirogorovs. Recon 1 is one of the only places I know to get them, and they drop, one knife every now and then. But most of the time, they're $2,000-$3,000 knives, or it's a lottery. You just can't buy them. You got to go to the secondary, and the secondary is tough. I mean, they're tough on these. If they get posted, they're gone. So I noticed they come out with a new model, and I reviewed it as well. The Shirogorov. What was that model? I don't remember. I have to look back at it in a minute. But I reviewed it and did not like it. It had like an upswept. It was completely different than this knife. It was about the same size, but had a wood inlay. It just was not for me. So then, I'm still undeterred because, that's one model. It was a great knife. I mean, the action was killer. It was just like this, but it just wasn't this kind of knife. So this is a F95 NL. They came out with recently, or I don't know how recently, but a newer version of the F95, the F95R NL. The R stands for refined. I wanted one, but when I looked at them, the edges were chamfered more here. They were kind of folded over. And the inlays that they had were just kind of wild. They were like orange and red, and it just didn't appeal to me. But I broke down and finally just bought one, and I bought it secondhand and pretty much paid retail for it. I got it, and it had a multi-row bearing system, and this had a single row bearing system. This one was smoother. I've found out since then it's because the lock bar was too tight on it, needed a little bit of work on it, and I know that it would have been probably smoother than this one, but this one is about as smooth as it gets. I mean, you can put your fingers on the lock bar and flip this thing out. It's perfect. That was after, a good friend told me how to relieve the lock bar pressure. I don't advise that if you don't know what you're doing, if you haven't done it a lot. I've done it a lot on almost all my Medfords. I relieve the lock bar pressure. I think the manufacturers just put it on a little tight just because they would rather it be too tight than too loose, because too loose is, big problems. So I relieved the lock bar pressure on that, and oh my God, it got 10 times better. So then I wanted a neon, and this is what we're talking about today. This is the Neon Zero. It's the nude version, plain M390. This one's an L-Max. This is M390. And when I got this one, it was a little bit of the same thing. I loved it, though. I mean, I loved everything about this knife, except the action was a little bit stiff. When I'm deploying it, I'm trying to get my fingers all the way off the lock bar and hold it, all funky, and it was still kind of tough to deploy. But I went to relieve the lock bar pressure on this one, and this one, the over travel stop, had a screw. So it was easy to take off and fix. This one does not. And no, there's not a screw on the inside either. So I'm thinking they epoxied that thing in there, or did some kind of trick and clicked it in there. So I talked to Spencer again, I'm like, "Hey, what do I do here?" And he's like, "Well, believe it or not, there's just a small drop of Loctite holding that in there." And I thought, there's no way that all they used in there was a drop of Loctite. And he's like, "Yeah, if you just heat it up above 150 degrees, it'll pop right out of there." And sure enough, sure did. Do not advise that unless you just really know what you're doing. You get too much heat on this titanium in any spot, any direction, it'll turn purple in just a few seconds. It'll turn bronze or purple, and then you've ruined the finish on your knife. You're not going to get it back to what it is right there, is what I mean. So I don't advise that. If your lock bar is too tight, I'd advise you to send it back to Shirogorov. Send it back to Recon 1 or wherever you got it. But anyway, I did it. Took it off and relieved the lock bar pressure and put it back together. Put a small drop of Loctite in there. And oh my goodness. These two knives now, this one has a multi-row bearing system. 2 rows of bearings. This one has a single row of bearings. Now, one of the things that turned me off of Shirogorov for all these years, I actually almost bought one time, and I remembered, I was like, oh, that's the one with the loose bearings in there. I don't want nothing to do with that. Well, that was foolish of me, because those loose bearings are magic. And they're not just loose in there. There's a like a cage that holds them in place. So they're not just, don't get me wrong, when you open this, bearings are going to go everywhere. You're going to need a set of needle pliers and all that to put it back together. But it's not as bad as it sounds. If you work on a work mat or something like this and contain those bearings and are careful, it's not a problem. It just takes a couple more minutes than if you had a phosphorus bronze washer or a bearing race, and it takes a little more technique to do it. But anyway, the loose bearings work flawless, and if I was them, I wouldn't change it either. But to me, that is a beautiful, beautiful knife. What's his name? What does he call it? Monochromatic. I don't know if that's the right word, but it's beautiful. I always saw these two in, like, from a distance in a picture, right? And it looked like this was just like sandblasted, like it would be rough. It is like glass. I mean, it's just so satisfying. And these come hair popping sharp. This is in L-Max, and I'll tell you what, since I've had this, I've really grown to like L-Max. I've always thought about L-Max as kind of a secondary steel. I've carried this quite a bit, and I can tell you that it's still hair popping sharp. I don't have any issues with L-Max. But I can tell you today that these are two of my favorite knives. I'm not telling you they're the best knives out there. I'm telling you they're my favorite. They just meet. And I'm not even a flipper guy. I've never really liked flippers. I love these knives. This one is the perfect. I have huge hands. A lot of times 2X gloves are tight on me, and I can easily get 4 fingers on this knife. This would be the only knife I'd ever need the rest of my life. But not with my knife addiction, but if I were a normal person. This action is killer. You can put your fingers on the lock bar. It doesn't matter. I mean, you take them off the lock bar and it's even better, but they're just great. Let's look at some size comparisons. Everybody, so this is size, I've already reviewed that. This is the Benchmade bug out. Very, very close in size. Actually, the Shirogorov is a little bit bigger. The handle sticks out just a little bit more. As far as the blade goes, very similar in size. I mean, the bug out's only, it might be a little bit heavier, not by much. Let's see here. Another epic knife, Grimsmo Rask. The Rask oversizes it. Both have similar actions. Actually, the Shirogorov is much better than the Rask, but the Rask is very, very good. But the difference is this is phosphorus bronze washers. This is bearings. You know, to get the action that the Grimsmos do with this phosphorus bronze washer is insane. Insane. Let's do one more. Another one everybody knows. Spyderco Delica. You can see the Shirogorov is about an inch bigger. Anyway, just want to kind of tell you my experience and why I'm addicted to these little bears right here. And there's so many. If you don't know about Shirogorov, there are so many variations. There's so many. It's a study all of its own. Similar to Medford. You know, it took me a long time to learn all the Medford models and variations. Shirogorov was a whole new class to start over. But the ones I'm familiar with are the F95s, and there's lots of versions of these. The Neons, there's lots of versions of these. There's a larger one, the 111. It's a really big knife. There's a 110. It's a little bit smaller knife. Those are both liner locks. They have liner locks, frame locks. If you haven't tried them, and you're to a point in your collection where you've bought all the knives you really wanted, and you really don't know which way to go from there, I can honestly tell you Shirogorov is the way to go. They're just killer knives. I like to buy made in America knives as much as anybody else, but when somebody's going to make a killer knife like this, I'm going to buy it. I mean, they're great. I mean, I love them. So, anyway, that's the Shirogorov Neon Zero in nude. Guys, thanks for watching. God bless you and your families. Say a prayer for our country. Good night.